I'd like to start off by introducing the topic for our conversation, which is on the future of library systems. And it's based around a white paper that Ken Chad of Ken Chad Consulting published recently entitled Resource Management for Libraries, A New Perspective. In that paper, Ken asserted that library systems have reached a tipping point and are starting to become library services platforms. So this debate is to look at some of the points that Ken raised in the white paper. We're going to cover things such as the new reality of library resource management, the impact on the library in terms of systems infrastructure, shared services, analytics and workflows, what libraries can now do to meet strategic and institutional goals that they may have struggled with a little bit before, and the need to integrate and make systems much more interoperable than they were before. We're also going to address one big question as well, which is whether the cloud is actually becoming the new normal. So I'd like to take a few minutes just to introduce our panelists. Ken Chad is the Managing Director of Ken Chad Consulting. He gained his MA from the Information Science Department at City University in London, and he's also an alumnus of the Warwick University Business and Innovation Growth Programme. Ken's consulting customers include a wide range of academic, research, college, public, corporate and national libraries in the UK and throughout the world. His consulting activities include work for businesses, for academic institutions, local authorities and for sector bodies such as GISC, SCONL and the Research Information Network. Ken's published articles widely and presented widely on the strategic impact of library technology, research systems and on ebooks. He's a member of the Chartered Institute of Library and Information Professionals and also the American Library Association, and Ken is also a main and research and innovation committee member of the UKSG. The other panelist that we have with us today is Alan Oliver. Alan is the Business Development Director of Libris, in which role he's responsible for helping European customers to develop their library strategy. As part of this, he works closely with the Libris product management, development and strategy teams to provide the voice of the customer. Prior to this, Alan led the team of solution consultants at Libris as they worked with libraries throughout Europe to develop innovative solutions to resource management, discovery and delivery, reading lists and preservation and archiving requirements. Alan is also a qualified and experienced librarian. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Ken Chad. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ivor, and welcome everybody. As Ivor mentioned, the debate is focused around the issues that I raised in the recent briefing paper, and you'll see on the screen Higher Education Library Technology. So if you haven't already read that paper, I do of course commend it to you. It's available from Higher Education Library Technology, that's HeLibTech.com, or you'll also see my web address, www.kenchad.com there, and if you go to my publications page, you can get the paper. So just following on from Ivor, what I'm going to do is, in a sense, distill some of the key issues from that perspective, the briefing paper, and see how we go with the debate. So I'd certainly welcome any questions and comments. That's really good. So generally, an overview of the things I want to talk about is really whether there is a market shift that's happening or has already happened. And really, do you need a library services platform? What are those problems that you've got that a library services platform might solve? And picking up that point that Ivor made, so what's all this fuss about the cloud? And finally, we'll have some concluding remarks. So really, to address that first point, is there really a market shift? And for those of us who've been in the business quite a while, we've seen changes happening a number of times. And in the paper, I refer back to a report that I was involved with that we did for GISC, which supports technology and innovation in higher education, and SCONL, the university and college and national librarians. And really, the outcome of that report, looking at the market, doing horizon scan, was back in 2008, it was put bluntly, don't go off and buy a library management system and LMS. Invest in other things, and that's pretty much what libraries did. They invested in discovery services and institutional repositories and a lot of other things. But things started to change, and I think for us in the UK, certainly 2012 was significant, but that quote I've given there is a quote from a bunch of US librarians that were saying that their sense of a tipping point for some dramatic change, so not just normal change, but dramatic change in the area of library automation systems. And then jumping ahead 3 years to 2015 today, using the information that I gather on behalf of UK higher education institutions, roughly speaking, and it changes every month or so, 15% of higher education institutions, universities and so on, have already decided to move to a library services platform. So in the UK, there's certainly a distinct and marked shift in the market there.
So, Ken, I would first of all like to say good afternoon to you and to everybody else who has joined the debate. I would like to hear back up exactly what you were saying, perhaps with some more figures. So, worldwide, when we look at ALMA as our library services platform, it's currently live at 230 institutions, and we actually expect to end 2015 with almost 400 live institutions using ALMA. We have in fact sold ALMA to more than 500 institutions, and just to give an idea of the scale, that means that some 12,000 people, staff, are using ALMA on a day-to-day basis. So I think what you say about reaching the tipping point is absolutely correct.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. That's really good to get that global perspective. I certainly don't think that what we're doing in the UK is any way unique. So looking at that market shift, I think it's interesting that that's been marked by a change in terminology. Back in 2008, the UK, we tend to talk about library management systems, of course not to be confused with learning management systems, and in other geographies like the US, the ILS or integrated library system. And one of the points I made in the paper was that quote there, that if you ask a librarian what library management system they use, quite often they'll talk about a system that has functionality and workflows that would have been familiar to us certainly 20, and in some cases even 30 years ago. So what I mentioned in the paper is, although there's some glossing of an interface, maybe a Windows interface or now a web interface, the expression I use in the paper is when you look at the DNA of some of these systems, they really do go back a very long time. And so I think that was a fairly static market at that point. So it was Marshall Breeding who coined the term library services platform. And as it says there, he thought that term was relevant because we've got a much different approach now to library resource management than we had with those old integrated library systems or library management systems. So that market shift is expressed in certainly a change in terminology. So, well, why? What's so very different about a library services platform compared to one of the conventional library management systems? The first thing that really strikes people is the problem that needed to be solved was integrating print and electronic resources. So that's clearly now integrated or unified for really the first time. And one of the points I make in the paper is that people had struggled with separate electronic resource management systems, but they really didn't get much traction. And people, some of them bought them, but never implemented them. So that's a key aspect. And related to that is, of course, the improved, more integrated, more efficient workflows that come from that unified or integrated approach to different resources. And then another aspect, which really comes at heart from some of the difference in technology, the service-oriented architecture, SOA, is that integration with admin systems, registry and finance are significantly easier, and systems are becoming coupled up, loosely coupled in SOA terminology. But that means that rather clunky interfaces between student systems and finance really now have the opportunity of being more dynamic, online, and more useful.
Ken, I would like to say here that at Libris and generally with our partners, we talk about print and electronic resources as you do, but we also put quite a great deal of focus on digital resources as well. So here we're particularly referring, when we talk about the difference between electronic and digital, typically electronic resources are resources that you subscribe to, you don't own. And digital resources are more likely, but not exclusively, owned by the institution. And one of the things that we're finding now is that there is really a big focus on digital resources within libraries. In fact, when we developed Alma, we first focused on print and electronic in accordance with the requirements of our development partners. But now we put in quite a deal of focus onto the development of digital functionality in Alma. About the other points you mentioned, I absolutely agree. One thing I would say about interoperability, it's no longer optional. It's absolutely a core requirement for everybody who introduces such a system.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I think the other differentiators around a library services platform, first one on the list there is this notion that search and discovery layers are decoupled from back-end processing. Now, it's true that some may prefer a particular discovery environment, but there certainly has been a strong notion coming up from all the previous years where a lot of people invested in separate discovery services, this notion of things being decoupled and working together within a platform, a library services platform. This cloud issue that I've raised right at the beginning, I think is really fundamental, and it's one of those words that gets bandied about and used in all sorts of ways. And I think the point that is important to me here is that this really is a shift from things being simply hosted. Sometimes we hear about being hosted in the cloud. And the point I make in the paper that's a different thing. What real cloud systems in this context as a library services platform mean is that there is essentially one system shared by many libraries in what's called, in technical terms, a multi-tenant environment. And that really does, in my view, make a game-changing change where there are real opportunities that I'm going to talk about a little bit later that have yet to be fully realised. But I think that cloud factor is really important, as do the point about analytics, and the two are related. And again, I think there's some useful distinctions in language in the sense that we're moving from what we were familiar with as management information to something that's analytics or business intelligence. And one of the areas of that is some of the ability to start using another jargon word, big data, to maybe predict behaviors or really indicate some interesting things that are going on in the systems rather than just simply recording simple transactions. And that analytics factor is something I'm going to come back to a bit later, because I do think it's a really important and underdeveloped thing. So in summary of this new market reality, this is a quote from Marshall Breeding's recent survey of library services platforms, and I think that, we agree with him. But really, they're not next generation anymore. We used to refer to these systems as next generation systems. But really, as we've seen from what Alan has said about globally and the data that I've got from the UK, these really are well-established products that are implemented in Marshall Breeding's terms in hundreds of libraries. So I think that really does amount to a new reality and indeed a significant market shift. And although that screen there is rather crowded, it's a screen from Higher Education Library Technology. that shows what libraries have been doing, and there's been a real pickup in the market. So things were very quiet all those years ago in 2008. And really, since 2014, there's really been a significant shift where we've even seen national systems for Wales shift to new library services platforms. So I'd certainly assert that that's really the new reality. And so what I'm going to move on to next is talk about what we're trying to do with these systems. But I think I don't know if Alan, you wanted to say anything about that UK market situation.
Yes, Ken. So a few things that I want to say. You covered quite a few things in that last section, actually. We'll have an opportunity to talk about analytics and about the cloud a little bit later. I think one of the things I would like to say just now is to follow up on your point about decoupled discovery. So I think you're absolutely right. At one time, libraries took the option to install a discovery solution from a vendor different on many occasions to the vendor of their library management system. I think as we see more and more tightly integrated workflows, that's going to decrease. And I think we'll find that libraries will go back to taking what we now call the library services platform and the discovery solution from the one vendor. I think the reason, as I said, for that is just the tight integration between these systems and also other systems that we'll have a chance to talk about a little bit later on as well. I gave a little bit earlier the figures. I'm not going to repeat those again, but I think just something to keep in mind as we talk about the new reality of those 12,000 library staff members across the world that are using Alma for their day-to-day job. So I think that confirms that it is indeed now generation rather than next generation.
Okay, thanks, Alan. So given that that's the new market reality, why would you want one of these library services platforms? What are the problems to be solved? And this is another way of looking at some of the characteristics of library services platform, but from the customer perspective. And I think I'm certainly finding that the area of user experience is growing in importance. I was at a user experience conference in Cambridge earlier on in this year. There's lots of blogs about library user experience. There's journals about library user experience. So I think this is one of the key areas that I see libraries trying to address. And clearly they're addressing that because the status quo of user experience is not as good as it should be. So what I point out there is there's just simply a bewildering array of systems and interfaces that confront a user when they're looking at the library ecosystem, if we can call it that. And one of the points I made in the paper is that while the unification of all the different systems that are associated with the library might be a pipe dream, certainly from a pragmatic point of view, reducing the number of silos is not. And we've seen the first stab at that with print, electronic, and as Alan says, digital resources. And that's really becoming core. But other things are coming into that integrated platform environment and reading list and so on. So those things which were seen previously as add-on systems are coming into the library services platform.
Can I agree with you here? I think one of the things that you said was hugely important. You said actually the status quo of user experience is not as good as it should be. And I think we have to remember, especially here in the UK, that universities now, and of course by the nature of the university libraries, are competing against others for students. You know, since the introduction of fees, it's very important that the university is providing value for money, the best user experience that's possible. And indeed, we've seen some shifts since the introduction of fees. Very unusual now, in fact, for academic libraries to charge fines. I think the opinion being that people are paying enough to be at the university without these additional charges. It's a very small example, but I think it also reflects on the necessity, not just the desire, but the necessity to make the user experience just as perfect as it can be.
Okay, thanks, Alan. So if any of you are out there with your integrated library systems or library management systems, user experience is top of the list, but I want to talk about some of the other key areas that are especially relevant to the theme of the paper, which was around resource management. And clearly, integrating print and electronic resources gives better management of collections. And one of the points I make in the paper is the nature of library collections is changing. There's archives, there's institutional repositories, libraries are getting more involved in research data management. So there's a whole load of stuff, if you like, out there. And related to that, efficiencies, bringing things together under one platform, is of course that point again, that more integrated workflows. So I'm seeing certainly it's more common for libraries to have integrated teams working with print and electronic material. That's certainly been a significant move over the last few years. And I think also finally that point about efficient infrastructure, it really is going to be hard for librarians to justify somebody that spends some part of their time on really what are nowadays quite menial tasks of software upgrades, system backups. That really is last generation stuff. And I think one of the quotes that struck me from a cloud conference, nothing to do with libraries actually, but was that last quote on the slide. I rather like this idea of we will see the beginning of the dawn of infrastructure irrelevance. So a lot of systems librarians are still and have been involved in just managing infrastructure. And I was at a presentation earlier on in the week from various people who provide cloud stuff, and it really is, there's stages to move to the cloud, but really that infrastructure aspect is something that we should be giving up in order to do other more useful things.
So Ken, here I would just like to say a little bit more on the management collections and integrated workflows. We'll have a chance to talk about the infrastructure later. But again, here we're talking about the management of print, of electronic and digital. And for the first time, libraries have the opportunity to do all of that in one system. So it really is the first time that libraries can compare, for example, the use of print and electronic and digital materials and can manage their businesses based on this type of information. We'll have an opportunity to talk about it a bit more when we discuss analytics and data, but I think it's important to remember that when we talk about managing print and electronic and digital together, we also need to think about the opportunities that brings us.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And I think coming back to that question of data analysis, I really do think this is one of the areas that will make a significant change. So that idea of all this data being there, that notion of big data, lots of data, leading to actionable insights, that's broadly known as analytics. And I do think that's a very significant change from just counting transactions, which is more or less what we've been doing up to now. And I think, in my mind, my view, and I'd be interested to hear what other people think, is that as we brought systems together under the umbrella of cloud, these are essentially shared systems. As we mentioned before, they're actually all operating on the same system. So there's a lot of opportunity to share data that isn't being done yet. There's lots of opportunity to make substantial improvements across that. And I also think the opportunity to bring library data into the world of learning analytics. I mentioned in the paper there's a project that JISC are doing where library data is being mixed with data from other systems, student systems, to look at interventions if there's a link between the way people use libraries and their academic success. Thankfully, that's a great thing. And so the idea of analytics is it will enable us to see patterns in the data and to take action on those patterns rather than counting transactions. So I think this is one of the key underdeveloped areas. It's still early days for library services platforms. They're not next generation. And I think analytics is one of the areas where there's huge opportunity and huge potential.
Can I, of course, absolutely agree with you here. So in Alma, for example, we have Alma Analytics. In Primo, we have Primo Analytics. These are both component parts of the solutions that we provide. And they're very important parts and parts that we see more and more focus as we take our solutions to the market and also in use by our existing customers. I think something else I would say here is that we begin to see the sharing just happening a little bit more than perhaps it was in the past. So maybe if I can give an example from Alma, for example, as you said, all Almas are the same. All of our clients are installed, or tenants are installed on one system. And we begin to see the sharing of analytic reports and analyses across institutions. So, of course, these institutions are not sharing their data unless they specifically choose to do that. What they're sharing are the structure of the reports. If I take one example from an example that you've used previously in our discussion, so SCONO statistics, we see some effort in the community to actually to share the development of the SCONO statistics within Alma. So this is very encouraging to see this. And in fact, just next week, after our user group meeting, there's a day dedicated to Alma Analytics. So I think this simply confirms your assertion that this is a hugely important part of the library service platform offering.
Okay, thanks, Alan. And I say for me, my challenge to the library services platform vendors and this whole area is to see analytics spreading out, say, beyond the confines of the library to help us do other things and come into the area of more broadly learning analytics. So that's what we've talked about there is if you've got an integrated library system, library management system, there's some of the reasons why you might want to change to a library services platform. And I think this notion of the cloud, as we've discussed a number of times, is really fundamental. And as Alan's just mentioned, there is just one copy of the application software, one operating system. And so that sounds great for the vendor. If I was a vendor, I'd think that's fantastic. I've only got one system to support and not only one version of the system, but literally one system, and I've got all my library clients on that. So that means it's much easier for me as a vendor to manage that system, to upgrade it, and so on. So, yeah, but okay, that's great for a vendor, but I think we want to look a bit beyond that and say, well, fine for the vendor, but what's in it for the library? What does that one copy of the application software and so on mean for the library? And I hope and I think we're at the point where we will be looking to see that the pace of software development really starts to ramp up. We hear from vendors all this stuff about cloud and agile, and what we want to see is overcoming what many people saw with the situation with library management systems and integrated library systems, that they'd really stopped developing. They'd actually got so complex and so difficult to innovate that they'd ground to a halt. And what we want to see, I think, certainly the librarians I talk to, is that pace of software development increasing. And I think the other point there is that analytics point is moving beyond shared infrastructure all sharing the same system, because you could get that with a hosted system, to genuine, what we tend to call in the UK shared services, the kind of things Alan's talking about, really sharing data, sharing all kinds of opportunities there. And I think in the UK, this as all the Welsh institutions got together, what we are looking for is to see whether they can really grab that opportunity of the cloud to do more and more shared services.
Ken, thank you for the challenge. I'm very happy actually that you made it, because I think it gives us an opportunity to illustrate what we are actually doing. So, first of all, I think you'll be pleased to hear that the development teams at HeLibris are not sitting with their feet up, but they are, in fact, developing. And we have a phrase that we use at HeLibris, which is relentless innovation. So I think this very accurately describes the way that we work, certainly within our company. Something that I want to tell you is that in the first year when we released Alma, we actually made 380 enhancements, so 380 new features. In the years 2013 and 2014, we added more than 500 new features to the software. And in this year, 2015, we expect to add 600 new features to Alma, more than 600. And for the first time now, we're also including some of the enhancements that have come directly from our users through our user group enhancement procedures. So what that means, in fact, is that since Alma became live or went live at the first site back in the summer of 2012, we've actually introduced more than 1,650 new features, and there have been 40 monthly releases. So in the entire life cycle of our other product, Alice, for example, we're now at release 22, 23. Since Alma went live just 3 years ago, we've had 40 releases and 1,650 new features. So some of the things that you talked about, the fact that there is only one version of Alma in Europe, the fact that we manage all of the upgrades for the libraries, and everything is centralized, really does give us the opportunity to innovate at a level that we've never seen before. So I think this is a hugely important part about library service platforms.
Okay, thanks, Alan. I think that notion that Ivor mentioned right at the beginning about the cloud now is the new normal, and there have been, over the past few years, some concerns about the cloud, not just in libraries, but all over the place. And I thought this quote from Andy Jassy from Amazon, and I think we all do have different opinions about how complete we think this is, but I think his point that the cloud is becoming the new normal is valid. And one of the things I think is quite exciting about us in libraries is that I see that, particularly in higher education, libraries are taking the lead in this, especially in terms of library services platforms becoming cloud-based. So I think we should be taking this opportunity in libraries to really take hold of this the new cloud-based platforms and start to push for new innovation, start to improve user experience, and do all those things that we've just talked about, and get over the fact, if you like, that, well, the cloud is something frightening or something challenging. There are challenges, but it really is the normal way of doing things now.
And it's interesting what you say here as well. So I would agree that in many institutions, the library is taking the lead. And sometimes we have seen, in fact, some resistance when the library has made a decision to select Alma as the library services platform. They then go to the corporate IT team and explain that it will be in the cloud. And there are often some other and further discussions that have to be had. And I think this is important. You know, of course, it's a big move for libraries, moving from on-premise to cloud solutions. It's also very important for us as a vendor that we can be trusted with this data. You know, the university is basically giving the data to us and trusting that we are going to take care of it in the appropriate way. And we've made a huge investment in this area at Libris. We have regional data centers, which means, for example, here in the UK, that all of the data is held in Europe and never leaves Europe. And that's very important for complying with data protection legislation. So this whole area of cloud, the whole shift between the on-premise and the hosted solution is really important. We sometimes go to institutions and they've maybe moved their email to the cloud. So Gmail is quite a popular option now in higher education, but that's really often all. Nothing else has gone. Everything else is within the doors of the institution and under their control. So it's quite a step change. And it would be nice indeed for me, and I'm sure for you as a librarian, to think that libraries are leading the way in this shift.
Okay, absolutely. I think that's an important one. So I'm on the home straight now, and I think what I want to do is, we talked about why you might want a library services platform, and I think, for me, I think we really do have a step change to a new environment. The cloud is one of the examples of that it really is significant. And I think it behoves us in the library world to really think more strategically about what we want from our systems. I've certainly been involved. I've been involved in hundreds of library system procurements, and almost all of them have been based on some detailed specifications. And I don't want to dismiss that, but I think we really need to look at the core requirements. And as I talk to library directors and senior librarians, I think I've distilled it down in the paper to 3 core areas, which are probably pretty obvious, but I think what we're not doing is challenging our library system vendors to say, right, how can learning and research outcomes be improved by using your system? So let's not ask them about the detail of cataloging. Well, maybe we will, but let's ask them, okay, how does your system help me do that? How does your system ensure that my library resources are better aligned to what I'm doing in the institution in terms of teaching and learning? And the research needs, research increasingly important. It's a major source of revenue for many UK universities. And how can the user experience be improved? We touched on that. It's not just the end user experience, but it's library staff, academics and students. And they're the key areas that I think we need to challenge our vendors and say, how does your system, your library services platform, what does it do to enable us to achieve these things? And rather, I suppose I put it graphically here, and I was at a university not so long ago talking about value proposition, which is a term they weren't that familiar with, but as vice chancellors and senior members of the university are increasingly coming from the business world, they're saying to the library, well, what is your value proposition? So we need to be clearer and articulate that in new ways. And I think library services platforms, in my view, need to get jobs. This term jobs comes from a methodology of user experience called jobs to be done, looking at what are you trying to do? So here's a question to the librarian. You want to increase the impact of the library on teaching research outcomes. So the question is, okay, Libris or other library services vendor, how is your library services platform going to help me measure that, for example? That's just one question that we might have. So I think that strategic way of looking at systems is crucially important now, and we do need to, let's not say we abandon specifications or RFPs completely, but I think we need more and more to really stress these more strategic concerns, and really that's my summing up, I think.
Ken, that's a very interesting point that you make. So anybody who has joined the debate and who has met me will know that I love nothing more than to demonstrate cataloging and every feature that we have to show how wonderful cataloging in Alma actually is. But to be honest, we also love these other questions. We love questions like, what is the value proposition of Alma with a unified discovery? Why should I pay for Alma and not choose an open source solution? What is the difference between what you're offering and what I have just now? Because that really gives us the opportunity to dig much more deeply and to talk about things that are much more important than tiny features that we might have in the solution. I told you that at the beginning of our discussion, by the end of the year, we'll have almost 400 institutions using Alma in a live environment. That tells me that Alma does what university libraries need it to do. So the focus on those much more important areas, the unified discovery, the pros and cons of open source solutions, the why don't we use Google instead of paying you for a search solution. These are the things that we really like to get into discussions about. So I agree that's where libraries should go, and the focus should be more on that than the tiny features that the system support.
Okay, well, that's me done. Look forward to people's comments or questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Ken and Alan. We've a few customers who have popped some questions into the Q&A box. I'll read those out in a second. For those of you that are still thinking about what's being said, please do, as I say, use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of the screen. Pop the questions in there. We are going to be monitoring those and answering them. One question that's come through straight away that I can answer myself is there going to be a recording or a podcast for this presentation? The answer to that is yes. We'll need a couple of days to get the video prepared, but we'll circulate that to you as soon as we possibly can. So a couple of questions that have come through already, and I'll start off with the first one, which is, I guess, to both Alan and to Ken. Are there plans to allow libraries to share their report data with each other to allow them to make comparisons with similar institutions?
I'll make one small comment, but I think this might be an area where Alan can talk more. I think I'd like to see that. I think from the information I pick up from librarians, there's still a little bit of concern that people love the concept of sharing, but when it comes down to revealing their local data and comparing it with others, they can be a little circumspect, and I appreciate that. So, and I think there are ways in which those things can be overcome, and I think they will need to be overcome if we're to really gain the value of these cloud-based, essentially shared systems. But there are some practical difficulties, but I think we now need to confront them because we've got the environments now which have the potential to make use of that shared data across institutions for comparisons. And so, but yeah, I think there are still some concerns, but perhaps Alan can, he mentioned scholar reports and things, and I guess that's part of it.
Yeah, Ken, certainly we're going to make it possible, so that is certainly the case. I think, as you say, there is still sometimes a little bit of reluctance. I mean, of course, ultimately, libraries are sharing the data. The Sconnell statistics, for example, are publicly available to you and me and to anybody else who wants them as well. Just not quite directly in the systems yet, but I think that will certainly come. I think one of the other things that some of our consortia customers are doing, for example, is comparison and indeed collection development on that level. So where there's an established consortia, sometimes there's a more of a willingness to actually share. But certainly the infrastructure is there to allow it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. Another question that's come in, just going back to Ken's earlier points about aligning with institutional goals. It sounds as though Ken is arguing for more alignment with that, quite correctly. So how do he and Alan see library service platforms evolving in the future to make it easier to achieve this objective?
That's a really good question. A simple answer is, well, partly I don't know, but I think it comes back to that opportunity we've got with the technology to deliver to institutional goals that we haven't really had before. And I think one of the citations I give in the paper is from, I think it's the University of Sussex, where in their library strategy, the institutional goals are very much in play, and that's certainly, I've been doing some work with some universities recently around that. So I think libraries need to articulate their value proposition better to their institutions. I was talking to a library not so long ago with the most fabulous depth and breadth of collections, and they saw that as one of the key elements of their value proposition to the institution. I think one of the things that needs to happen, though, is that needs to be really tested, and evidence needs to be created to make that what we feel must be an obvious proposition become reality. And I think that's an area where there is opportunity for library services platforms to help librarians develop in that last slide, how am I going to measure something, the analytics side of it. So I think there is opportunity there.
I would agree with what you say there, and I think something else, also something that you mentioned in your paper, and we mentioned earlier in our discussion as well, and that's the integration. So, of course, as librarians, you and I, and probably many of the people who have joined us would like to think that the library is the centre of the university world. And indeed, to us it is. But in reality, the library is part of a larger ecosystem. It's part of it's an organisation that needs to work closely with other parts of the institution, with other departments and with other systems. And I think one of the things that we focus on with Alma is the ease of this integration, making sure that we don't have data duplication, we don't have more silos of data, because all of these things are things that actually help the institution to achieve their goals. So the tighter and closer integration, I think, is something in addition to what you mentioned that's very important.
Thank you for that. Another question that's come through, and I guess this one is actually probably more aimed for Alan, but Ken, it would also be interesting to get your perspective on this from a sort of a wider angle. But the question is, what are the implications of implementing Alma and Primo for library staff roles? So specifically, how are librarians affected by the implementation of Alma and Primo? But Ken, also your perspective maybe on how you see library roles changing under the new paradigm.
So, Ivor, maybe I'll start with that one. I think what we see is evidence of people having more time to focus on end user experience, something that we both talked about in the paper as being very important. So while Alma, of course, doesn't, while Alma changes the way that people work in some ways, and sometimes teams might change, for example, with the closer integration of print and electronic and digital, the main thing we see is that there is more time to be spent on serving the users. And that's indeed what most libraries that I talk to certainly want to do. They want to have their staff roaming, moving around in the library, in the stacks, rather than stuck behind desks or stuck in systems offices performing upgrades to software. So the biggest thing that we hear about is the opportunity to serve the users better.
Yeah, I agree there, and I think what I see is the libraries in higher education. I think I'm quite encouraged at how a number of librarians are really being innovative and getting themselves stuck into that strategic environment of teaching and learning, and in particular to research. Some of the work I've done with the University of Westminster has been about how the library can facilitate and engage with researchers. So as the presentation pointed out, several slides ago, we shouldn't be spending time upgrading system. We shouldn't be spending time on admin. We've got our value proposition is we've got to get up the scale. So that's a great opportunity, but a challenge for staff. Staff are going to have to acquire new kinds of skills, new attributes, new personal attributes, and new skills to be able to say, we now need to be sitting alongside, for example, researchers and helping them, for example, to see how their research outcomes can be made better, and how we can help maybe in helping them understand the impact of their research. So there's roles for librarians there, and I see a number of innovative institutions grabbing that wholeheartedly and getting into areas even of publishing and so on. So I think that means that we haven't got time to do all this other stuff. We have to get, as we've mentioned before, workflows for print and electronic resources integrated so we can do these other things. And I'll finish that comment by saying, as I went into a university to talk about about research systems, very first meeting was the Vice Chancellor of the university there right away, because that was a very, very high value aspect of what the library was trying to do. And I thought that was indicative. So, put bluntly, stop doing upgrades and admin in your system. Start giving staff new skills, new aptitudes, so that they can start engaging in those kinds of activities.
Excellent, thank you. Another question that's come through is about new formats that are emerging. So I think the question here is about RDA and BibFrame and linked open data. How do we see the impact that these new formats are going to have on the shift in library systems and the movement across the library service platforms? Maybe start off with Ken on that one.
Yeah, well, I don't think we've done anywhere near enough to do that. We still are dealing with the MARC format, which of course the whole BibFrame initiative really does demonstrate is no longer fit for purpose. So it's a question of the library needing to move into the wider web world, and that means abandoning MARC. I've done a lot of work with libraries and archives, and it is a pain to try and manage archival records, which are hierarchical in structure, with bibliographic records. It really isn't easy. And we need to make that and those moves to things like, actually, I think RDA is just a sideshow here. I think it's more web descriptions and the ability, and I think linked to this is linked data too, that we need to be able to get our data out in such a way that it's open and can be linked to, and the library is behind the commercial applications of those kind of metadata linked things, metadata dependent things like the semantic web. So there's Google with its knowledge graph, and libraries ought to be sharing this stuff, and being the most open institutions are lagging behind, and we need to catch up. And I think library services platforms are a tool to do that, but I think we've still got a way to go.
Ken, one of the things that Ken says quite interests me, because as much as I love to demonstrate cataloging and the features of cataloging, I also love MARC, but I also accept that we need to move on. And I talked about the new features that we've been adding to Alma. One of the things that we'll be turning our focus to next year are some of the enhanced, emerging, and advanced metadata formats that Ken, you just mentioned. So, for example, linked open data and BibFrame as well. So I think there is still a place for the traditional formats. They're still important because nobody has really yet proven that the new formats replace them and provide viable solutions. But I think that over the next years we will indeed see that happening, and we will see probably another step change in this particular area.
Excellent, thank you. We're coming up towards the end of our webinar. We've got about another 3 minutes to go. So I think one more question and one quick and short answers to, I think, will probably be called for here. So the cloud and increasing the open integrations and making collaboration easier. Where do Ken and Alan see the quick wins in all of this? So maybe start off with Ken on that one.
A quick win for the cloud. Well, I think it's a staged approach. We've got to the point of infrastructure irrelevance. Well, we haven't all got there, but that's the step along the way. The second step is all that stuff we've been talking about, really under that umbrella of shared services and analytics. I think that's the step. So I think the path to I was going to say the path to nirvana, but I daren't say that. But that's where we're going.
And I would agree, Ken. I think another quick win for the cloud. The evidence was there in front of us. 40 new releases of Alma, no system librarian having to do any of these, and indeed the analytics, the fact that every pound, every dollar, every euro that's spent in the library has to be accounted for, has to be justified, and analytics is the way that the libraries will do that.
Excellent, thank you very much. Fortunately, that was the last of the questions that we've had through, and we are coming up to bang on the hour now. So I'd like to thank everybody who's taken the time to attend the webinar. As I said before, we will be sending a link to the recordings to this out, and also don't forget to visit Ken's website, kenchadconsulting.com, where you'll be able to access a copy of the white paper free of charge as well. So keep your eyes open on your emails for the links to the recordings, and I hope that you have an enjoyable rest of the week. Thank you very much. Cheers now.